Her beauty is the one weapon he's never faced. Chapter 1. The Princess Who Was Ignored. Princess Sorelia Vespera of Thalren descended from her star yacht like a living shard of the cosmos. Her skin glowed in shifting blues, midnight at her temples, pale nebulae along her cheeks, and a luminous sapphire sheen across her collarbones. Her people called it astral skin, a mark of royal lineage. Humans simply stared, entranced. The Grand Hall of Concordance was built for spectacle, vaulted ceilings of transparent alloy revealing the swirling gas giant below, banners of both worlds suspended in artificial gravity, and 1,000 dignitaries gathered to witness the first human Thalren treaty in history. Sorelia expected awe. She expected reverence. She expected the usual hush that followed her like a tide. She did not expect him. A human soldier stood at the far perimeter, helmet tucked under his arm, posture rigid, gaze fixed straight ahead. He didn't bow, he didn't whisper, he didn't even flick his eyes toward her. He simply ignored her. Sorelia stopped mid-stride. Her attendants nearly collided with her. A dozen cameras pivoted. The Thalren nobles stiffened, sensing her sudden shift in mood. But Sorelia barely noticed any of them. Her attention locked onto the soldier. He was tall for a human, broad-shouldered, blond with a scar that cut cleanly across his jawline. His uniform was immaculate, his expression unreadable. He radiated discipline like a gravitational field. And he had not spared her a single glance. A strange sensation fluttered in her chest. Something sharp, electric, and entirely unfamiliar. "Why isn't he looking at me?" She resumed walking, but her steps were slower now, deliberate, her gaze fixed on him as if drawn by magnetic pull. When she reached the dais, she leaned toward her advisor without taking her eyes off the soldier. "Who is that human?" she murmured. Her advisor followed her gaze. "Lieutenant David Bishop, Princess, Special Forces, assigned to perimeter security. Highly decorated, highly disciplined, highly—" "Unimpressed," Sorelia finished, her voice tight. Her advisor blinked. "Princess?" Sorelia straightened, chin lifting with royal poise, but her pulse was still racing. She had been admired by kings, courted by warlords, serenaded by poets from 3 star systems. But never, not once, had she been ignored. And the sensation it stirred in her was not anger. It was fascination, dangerous fascination. As the treaty ceremony began, Sorelia forced herself to focus on the speeches, the rituals, the diplomatic choreography she had rehearsed since childhood. But her gaze drifted again and again to the soldier who refused to look at her. And each time the pull grew stronger. By the time the final signatures were inked, Sorelia Vespera, heir to the Thalren throne, trained in diplomacy, warfare, and emotional control, knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would make that soldier look at her, no matter what it took. Chapter 2. The Soldier Who Would Not Yield. Lieutenant David Bishop was exactly where he was supposed to be, standing guard at the eastern archway of the Grand Hall, posture rigid, eyes forward, expression carved from stone. He didn't shift when dignitaries passed. He didn't react when Thalren nobles whispered about him. He didn't even blink when the princess approached, though he felt her presence like a sudden change in atmospheric pressure. Princess Sorelia stopped in front of him, her bioluminescent gown casting soft blue light across his boots. She waited for him to acknowledge her. He didn't. "Human soldier," she said, her voice smooth but edged with command. "Look at me." David kept his gaze fixed ahead. "I'm under orders not to engage with foreign royalty, Princess." Sorelia's eyes narrowed. "Your orders do not forbid basic courtesy." "No, ma'am," he said, "but they do forbid distraction." The word struck her like a slap. Distraction. as though she were some trivial flicker in the corner of his vision, as though she were not the heir of Thalren, trained in diplomacy, warfare, and the art of commanding entire rooms with a single glance. She stepped closer, her voice dropping. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes, Princess." "And you still refuse to look at me?" "Yes." Sorelia felt heat rise beneath her skin, her bioluminescence brightening in response. She wasn't sure if it was anger or something far more disorienting. No one had ever denied her attention before. No one had ever dared. "Explain yourself," she demanded. David exhaled slowly, as though bracing for impact. "My job is to watch the room, not the royalty." Sorelia stared at him, stunned by the simplicity of the statement. He wasn't trying to insult her. He wasn't trying to impress her. He was simply doing his duty. And that made him even more infuriating. She stepped close enough that the faint warmth of his breath brushed her cheek. "You presume much, Lieutenant." "And you presume more," he replied, still not looking at her. Her pulse stuttered. "You are mocking me." "No, Princess. I'm being honest." Honesty. Another unfamiliar sensation. People lied to her constantly, out of fear, out of reverence, out of ambition. But this man, this soldier, spoke to her as though she were simply another person standing in his way. She didn't know whether to strike him or kiss him. "Very well," she said, her voice softening despite herself. "If you insist on boundaries, then I will allow you to make the first move." David finally turned his head. Their eyes met. Sorelia felt the world tilt. His gaze was steady, unflinching, and utterly devoid of the awe she was accustomed to. He looked at her like she was real, like she was flawed, like she was someone he wasn't afraid to challenge. "Good," he said quietly. Then he stepped around her and resumed his patrol. Sorelia remained frozen in place, her heart pounding in her throat. She had approached him expecting obedience. She had received defiance. And instead of recoiling, she felt something inside her ignite. A challenge. A spark. A pull she couldn't ignore. She watched him walk away, her breath unsteady. If he would not give her his attention, she would take it. And with that thought burning in her chest, she turned toward the observation deck, already planning her next move. Chapter 3. The chase begins. Princess Sorelia had never been accused of subtlety, and she wasn't about to start practicing it now. For the next 2 days, the Grand Hall and its surrounding corridors became her hunting grounds. Wherever Lieutenant David Bishop was assigned, she found a reason, diplomatic, ceremonial, or blatantly fabricated, to pass through the same space. At first, she approached with regal poise, offering polite greetings that he acknowledged only with curt nods. When that failed, she tried lingering near him, pretending to study architectural details or holographic displays. David simply shifted his stance and continued scanning the room, treating her presence like background noise. It was maddening. Sorelia was accustomed to being the center of gravity in any room she entered. People orbited her. They sought her attention, her approval, her favor. But David Bishop behaved as though she were just another dignitary in a crowded hall. Important, yes, but irrelevant to his mission. And the more he ignored her, the more she felt that strange, magnetic pull tightening inside her. By the 3rd day, she abandoned pretense entirely. She intercepted him during a security sweep of the observation deck, stepping directly into his path. The wide windows behind her framed the swirling storms of the gas giant below, casting shifting gold light across her skin. "Lieutenant Bishop," she said, blocking his way, "you are avoiding me." David stopped, helmet under his arm, expression unreadable. "I'm following my orders, Princess." "Your orders do not require you to flee at the sight of me." "I don't flee," he said evenly. I reposition. Sorelia's eyes narrowed. You are mocking me. No, ma'am, I'm clarifying the situation. She took a step closer, her voice dropping. Why do you resist me? David exhaled slowly, as though choosing his words with care. Because you're acting like someone who's used to getting whatever she wants. Sorelia's breath caught. And that offends you? It concerns me, he said. You're a princess. I'm a soldier. There are boundaries. Boundaries, she repeated, tasting the unfamiliar word. You think I care about boundaries? I think you should. She stared at him, stunned by the audacity. No one had ever spoken to her with such blunt honesty. It wasn't disrespectful, just firm, steady, unyielding. He wasn't trying to insult her. He was trying to ground her, and for reasons she couldn't explain, that made her pulse quicken. You presume much, Lieutenant, she said, though her voice lacked its usual sharpness. And you presume more, he replied. Sorelia felt heat rise in her cheeks. She wasn't sure if it was anger or something far more dangerous. She stepped even closer, close enough that the faint warmth of his breath brushed her skin. Tell me what you want from me. David finally looked at her, really looked at her, and the intensity of his gaze sent a shiver down her spine. I want you, he said quietly, to stop chasing me. Sorelia's heart stuttered. And if I don't? Then I'll have to put you in your place. The words struck her like a shock wave. For a moment, she was too stunned to speak. No one had ever dared to challenge her like that. No one had ever suggested she needed to be put anywhere. Her first instinct was fury. Her second was disbelief. But beneath both, something else stirred, something warm and unsettling and entirely new. She swallowed, her voice softer than she intended. Very well, Lieutenant. If you insist on boundaries, then I will let you make the first move. David nodded once, as if satisfied. Good. He stepped around her and continued his patrol. Sorelia remained where she was, staring after him, her pulse racing. She had come to confront him. Instead, she had surrendered ground she didn't even know she could lose, and for the first time in her life, Princess Sorelia Vespera felt the thrill of being outmatched. Chapter 4. Shadows in the Hall. The treaty summit was supposed to be a celebration, 3 days of diplomatic ceremonies, cultural exchanges, and cautious optimism. But beneath the polished speeches and polite smiles, something darker simmered. Sorelia felt it first. It began as a subtle shift in the air, a faint prickle along her bioluminescent skin whenever she entered a room. Conversations hushed too quickly when she approached. Human officers exchanged glances they thought she didn't notice. Thalren nobles whispered in tight clusters, their expressions sharp with disapproval. She knew the signs. She had been raised in a palace where politics was a blood sport. Someone was plotting, and she suspected it had everything to do with the human soldier she couldn't stop thinking about. David Bishop, meanwhile, moved through the summit like a ghost, silent, disciplined, impossible to read. He kept his distance from her just as he'd promised, but Sorelia could feel his awareness of her like a steady pulse in the background. Even when he wasn't looking at her, she sensed him tracking her movements, adjusting his patrol routes, subtly positioning himself where he could intervene if needed. He was avoiding her, but he was also protecting her, and that contradiction only made her want him more. On the final evening of the summit, the grand hall was transformed for the Unity banquet. Floating lanterns drifted overhead, casting warm light across the crowd. Musicians from both worlds played harmonized melodies. Diplomats toasted to peace. Sorelia stood near the central fountain, trying to focus on the festivities, but her gaze kept drifting toward the perimeter, toward David. He was stationed near the western archway, scanning the crowd with quiet intensity. His posture was relaxed enough to blend in, But Sorelia recognized the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand hovered just a breath closer to his sidearm. He sensed it, too, the danger, the wrongness. She moved toward him, weaving through the crowd with practiced grace. When she reached him, she spoke softly, careful not to draw attention. "Lieutenant," she murmured, "something is amiss." David didn't look at her. "I know." Sorelia's pulse quickened. "You feel it as well." "I'd be worried if you didn't," he said. "Half this room wants the treaty to fail." "And the other half wants us to fail," she replied. That made him glance at her, just for a moment, but long enough for her to see the truth in his eyes. He had noticed the whispers, the stares, the tension that followed her like a shadow. "Princess," he said quietly, "you need to be careful." She lifted her chin. "I am always careful." "No," he said, his voice low and firm. "You're bold. You're fearless. You walk straight into danger because you assume you can handle it." Sorelia bristled. "And you think I cannot?" "I think," he said, "that someone is trying to use you, or hurt you, or both." Sorelia's breath caught, not because she feared the threat. She had faced worse, but because of the way he said it, not as a soldier issuing a warning, but as a man who cared. Before she could respond, a sudden flicker of movement caught David's eye. His hand shot out, gripping her arm, not roughly but with enough force to pull her behind him. A split second later, a glass orb shattered against the pillar where she had been standing. A burst of corrosive vapor hissed through the air, eating into the marble with a sizzling crackle. The music stopped. Screams erupted. Guards surged forward. David drew his weapon, positioning himself between Sorelia and the chaos. "Stay behind me," he ordered. Sorelia's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the fierce, protective energy radiating off him. She had never seen him like this, focused, dangerous, ready to kill for her. She stepped closer, her voice steady. "I am not helpless, Lieutenant." "I know," he said, eyes scanning the crowd, "but I'm not letting anyone touch you." The word struck her deeper than any weapon could. Around them, the banquet dissolved into panic. Human officers shouted orders. Thalren guards activated energy shields. Diplomats scrambled for cover. But Sorelia saw only David, standing firm, unyielding, prepared to face whatever threat had just revealed itself. And for the first time, she understood the truth. This was no longer a game of pursuit. This was war, and they were already in the middle of it. Chapter 5. Fire in the Hall. The Grand Hall of Concordance had never known chaos until now. The shattered orb's corrosive vapor still hissed against the marble as alarms blared through the chamber. Guards from both species surged forward, forming defensive lines. Diplomats scrambled behind overturned tables. The floating lanterns flickered wildly, casting frantic shadows across the walls. David didn't hesitate. He pulled Sorelia behind a support pillar, shielding her with his body as he scanned the room for the attacker. His movements were sharp, precise, honed by years of combat. Sorelia felt the heat of him against her back, the tension in his muscles, the steady rhythm of his breath. "Stay low," he said, voice calm despite the chaos. Sorelia bristled. "I am not a fragile ornament, Lieutenant." "Never said you were," he replied, eyes still sweeping the hall. "But someone just tried to melt your face off, so forgive me for being cautious." Despite the danger, a spark of amusement flickered in her chest. His bluntness was becoming strangely endearing. A second projectile streaked across the hall, this one a pulse bolt aimed directly at them. David reacted instantly, grabbing Sorelia's waist and pulling her into a roll. The bolt slammed into the pillar, sending shards of molten alloy spraying across the floor. Sorelia landed atop him, breathless, her palms pressed against his chest. His heartbeat thudded beneath her fingers, steady, strong, grounding. Their eyes met. For a moment, the world narrowed to just the two of them. Then David gently pushed her off. "We need to move." Sorelia rose to her feet, her bioluminescent markings flaring with adrenaline. "Agreed." She lifted her hands, and the air around her shimmered. A pulse of blue-white energy rippled outward, forming a protective barrier that curved around them like a translucent shell. David blinked. "You can do that?" "I can do much more," she said, stepping forward. "Stay close." He didn't argue. Together, they advanced through the hall, Sorelia deflecting incoming fire with bursts of shimmering energy, David returning shots with lethal precision. Their movements synced naturally, as though they had trained together for years. Sorelia felt it again, that strange magnetic pull toward him. But now it was mixed with something deeper: trust, connection, the thrill of fighting beside someone who matched her strength with his own. A masked figure darted from behind a column, aiming a plasma blade at Sorelia's throat. David intercepted him mid-strike. Their weapons clashed with a burst of sparks. David twisted, disarmed the attacker, and slammed him to the ground in one fluid motion. Sorelia stared, breath catching. "You saved my life." David wiped a streak of soot from his cheek. "You saved mine first." Before she could respond, a thunderous explosion rocked the hall. The ceiling trembled. A section of the upper balcony collapsed, sending debris raining down. Sorelia reacted instinctively, throwing up a barrier. The falling rubble shattered against it, scattering harmlessly around them. David looked at her with something new in his eyes, something warm, something dangerous, respect, and something more. Sorelia felt heat rise beneath her skin. But there was no time to dwell on it. A squad of hostile operatives stormed through the main entrance, weapons raised. Their armor bore no insignia. Mercenaries, extremists, or agents from factions on both sides who wanted the treaty dead. David stepped forward, weapon drawn. "Princess, get behind me!" Sorelia stepped beside him instead. "No." He shot her a look. "Sorelia, we fight together." For a heartbeat, he hesitated. Then he nodded, and the two of them charged. The battle erupted in a storm of light and sound. Sorelia unleashed arcs of radiant energy that sent attackers flying. David moved with brutal efficiency, firing controlled bursts, striking with the butt of his rifle, using every inch of his training to keep her safe. They fought back to back, their movements perfectly aligned. Sorelia felt alive in a way she never had before. Not because of the danger, but because of him. Because of the way he trusted her. Because of the way he fought for her without hesitation. When the last attacker fell, silence swept through the hall. Smoke drifted through the air. Guards rushed to secure the perimeter. Diplomats peeked out from hiding places. The treaty summit lay in ruins. Sorelia turned to David, her chest rising and falling with exertion. "You protected me," she said softly. David holstered his weapon. "I told you I would. And I protected you." He met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. "Yes," he said. "You did." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then David stepped closer, just a fraction, but enough for Sorelia to feel the warmth of him, the gravity of him. "Princess," he said quietly, "this isn't over." "No," she agreed, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's only beginning." Outside the shattered hall, sirens wailed, warships mobilized. The fragile peace between their worlds trembled on the edge of collapse. And in the center of it all stood a princess and a soldier, bound now by battle, by danger, and by something neither of them could deny. Chapter 6. The Fallout. The Grand Hall still smoldered hours after the attack. Emergency crews swarmed the ruins, extinguishing fires and stabilizing the wounded. The treaty summit, once a symbol of hope, had become a battlefield. Sorelia stood at the center of the chaos, her gown torn, her bioluminescent markings dimmed with exhaustion. She watched as human and Thalren officials argued in frantic clusters, each side accusing the other of orchestrating the assault. Her father's emissaries surrounded her in a tight circle, their voices sharp with panic. "Princess, you must return to the royal cruiser immediately. It's unsafe here. You were nearly killed. Twice. This alliance is compromised." Surelia barely heard them. Her gaze kept drifting toward the medical tents where David had been taken for evaluation. He had insisted he was fine, but the medics had dragged him off anyway, citing protocol. She hadn't seen him since. Her chest tightened with something she didn't want to name. "Princess Surelia," a human diplomat said, stepping forward with a strained smile, "we request that you remain under human protection until we determine who is responsible." A Thalren noble bristled. "You mean you want to keep her as leverage?" "Leverage?" the diplomat snapped. "Your extremists attacked our summit. Your radicals attacked our princess." The argument erupted into shouting. Surelia closed her eyes, letting the noise wash over her. She felt the weight of two worlds pressing down on her shoulders. The treaty was collapsing. Warships were mobilizing, and she was being pulled in opposite directions by people who cared more about politics than her life. She needed clarity. She needed truth. She needed... "Princess." Her eyes snapped open. David stood at the edge of the crowd, a fresh bandage across his temple, uniform scorched, posture rigid. He looked exhausted, but alive. Relief flooded her so quickly it nearly buckled her knees. The officials noticed him and immediately stepped between them. "Lieutenant Bishop," a human general barked, "you are relieved of duty pending investigation." Surelia's head whipped toward the general. "Investigation? For what?" "For your proximity," the general said carefully. "Your interactions with this soldier have raised concerns." Surelia's markings flared with anger. "He saved my life." "And you saved his," a Thalren noble added sharply, "which raises questions about your attachment." David's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Surelia stepped forward, but two guards blocked her path. "Princess," one of her advisors whispered urgently, "you must not be seen with him. It will only inflame tensions." Surelia's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "I do not care." But the guards didn't move. David met her gaze across the barrier of bodies. His eyes were steady, but she saw the conflict in them. The duty pulling him one way, the unspoken connection pulling him another. "Princess," he said quietly, "you should go with your people." Surelia's breath caught. "No, it's safer." "For whom?" she demanded. He didn't answer, because they both knew the truth. Her presence endangered him. His presence endangered her, and their connection endangered everything. Surelia felt something inside her crack, not break, but shift, like tectonic plates grinding into a new alignment. She lowered her voice. "David, I don't want to be separated from you." For the first time, his composure faltered. "Surelia," he said softly, "if we stay together right now, they'll tear us apart." Her heart twisted. "They already are." The guards began to usher her away. David didn't move to follow. He stood perfectly still, watching her with an intensity that burned hotter than any weapon fired that night. As she was pulled toward the royal shuttle, Surelia turned her head, refusing to break eye contact until the last possible second. And in that final moment, she saw it. The truth he had been holding back, the truth she had been afraid to name, the truth that now pulsed between them like a living force. He cared for her, deeply, dangerously, and she cared for him. The shuttle doors closed. Surelia sank into her seat, her hands trembling. She had faced assassins, extremists, and political vipers without fear, but the thought of losing David Bishop terrified her, and she knew, with absolute, unshakable certainty, that she would not let it happen. Chapter 7. The war ignites. The royal cruiser cut through the upper atmosphere in tense silence. Sorelia sat rigid in her seat, hands clenched in her lap, her bioluminescent markings dim with frustration. Outside the viewport, the stars blurred into streaks of cold light. She had been separated from David for less than an hour, and already the distance felt unbearable. Her advisors spoke in hushed, frantic tones around her. The humans are mobilizing fleets. Our own warships are preparing countermeasures. The treaty is dead. We must return to Talren immediately. Sorelia barely heard them. Her mind replayed the moment she'd been pulled away from David, the look in his eyes, the unspoken truth between them, the fear that she might never see him again. She refused to accept that. A sudden jolt rocked the cruiser. Sorelia snapped upright. "What was that?" The pilot's voice crackled through the comms. "Unidentified vessels approaching. They're not human. They're not Thalren. They're—" Static swallowed the rest. The ship lurched violently as something slammed into the hull. Alarms blared. Lights flickered. Sorelia's advisors stumbled, shouting orders. "Shields failing! We're being boarded! Princess, get to the escape pod!" Sorelia rose to her feet, fury igniting in her chest. "No! I will not run!" The doors to the main corridor blew inward in a shower of sparks. Armored figures stormed through, mercenaries wearing matte black suits with no insignia. The same faction that had attacked the banquet. The conspirators had made their move. Sorelia summoned a surge of energy, her markings flaring bright blue. She hurled a blast of force down the corridor, sending the first wave of attackers crashing into the walls. But more poured in. Her guards formed a defensive line around her, firing pulse rifles, shouting commands. The cruiser shook as enemy ships latched onto its hull like predatory insects. Sorelia fought her way toward the bridge, her energy crackling through the air, but the mercenaries were relentless. One of them fired a containment net that wrapped around her, suppressing her powers with a surge of dampening energy. She fell to her knees, gasping. "Princess Sorelia Vespera," a distorted voice said through a helmet speaker. "You are coming with us!" Sorelia struggled, but the net tightened, draining her strength. The mercenary raised a stun baton and was thrown across the corridor by a burst of gunfire. Sorelia blinked through the haze. A boarding hatch on the far wall blew open, and a figure stepped through the smoke, rifle raised, eyes blazing with fury. David. He moved like a storm unleashed, precise, lethal, unstoppable. He fired controlled bursts, dropping mercenaries one by one. When he reached Sorelia, he tore the dampening net apart with his bare hands. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. Sorelia's breath caught. "You came for me." "Of course I did." He pulled her to her feet, his grip firm and grounding. The ship shook again as another enemy vessel latched on. "We have to move," David said. "They're here to take you." Sorelia steadied herself, her power returning in a rush. "Then let them try." They fought their way through the cruiser together. Sorelia unleashing arcs of radiant energy, David covering her with deadly accuracy. Their movements synced instinctively, as though they had trained for this moment all their lives. But the enemy force was overwhelming. Explosions rocked the ship, fires spread through the corridors. The hull groaned under the strain of multiple boarding parties. David grabbed Sorelia's arm. "We need to get off this ship now." "There are escape pods." "Already destroyed," he said grimly. "They want you alive, not dead." Sorelia's heart pounded. "Then how do we escape?" David pointed toward the docking bay. "We steal their ship." Sorelia stared at him. "That is reckless." "It's also our only option." She felt a fierce, wild smile tug at her lips. "Then lead the way." They sprinted through the burning corridors, dodging falling debris and enemy fire. The docking bay loomed ahead, filled with enemy craft and mercenaries preparing to breach deeper into the cruiser. David grabbed her hand. Stay close, he said. Sorelia squeezed his fingers. Always. They charged into the bay together. Sorelia unleashed a wave of energy that sent mercenaries flying. David vaulted over a crate, firing precise shots that cleared a path to the nearest enemy ship. They reached the ramp just as more attackers swarmed in. David shoved Sorelia inside. Go! She turned, firing a blast that sealed the hatch behind them. David sprinted to the controls, slamming his hand onto the ignition panel. The stolen ship roared to life. Sorelia strapped herself in as David wrestled the craft free from the docking clamps. The cruiser exploded behind them in a burst of fire and shrapnel. Sorelia gasped. My people! Escape pods launched, David said, scanning the sensors. They made it. Relief washed over her. Then she looked at him, really looked at him. His face was streaked with soot, his uniform torn, his eyes fierce with determination. You risked everything to save me, she whispered. David met her gaze, his voice low and raw. I wasn't going to lose you. Sorelia's heart surged, not with fear, not with duty, but with something deeper, something undeniable. She reached for his hand, and for the first time, he didn't pull away. Chapter 8. Starfire Rising. The stolen ship tore through the upper atmosphere of Thalren Prime, its hull glowing red from re-entry. David gripped the controls with white-knuckled focus while Sorelia stood beside him, bracing herself against the console as turbulence rattled the cabin. Below them, the capital city burned. Columns of smoke rose from the crystalline towers. Defense cannons fired streaks of blue light into the sky. Human and Thalren warships clashed in orbit, their explosions painting the heavens with fire. Sorelia's breath caught. They've already begun. David didn't look away from the viewport. We can still stop it. She turned to him, her voice soft but fierce. Not alone. He finally met her gaze. We're not alone. The ship shuddered as a blast grazed the hull. David swore under his breath and angled them toward the royal citadel, the heart of Thalren power, now under siege. Sorelia placed her hand over his on the throttle. Take us in. He nodded. The ship dove. They landed hard in the citadel's outer courtyard, skidding across shattered stone. David kicked the hatch open, rifle raised. Sorelia followed, her bioluminescent markings blazing with power. The courtyard was a war zone. Thalren guards fought mercenaries in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Human extremists fired pulse rifles from the ramparts. The conspirators had united factions from both sides into a single force of chaos. Sorelia stepped forward, energy crackling around her. Enough! Her voice echoed across the battlefield. Dozens of heads turned. A mercenary charged her, blade raised. Sorelia lifted her hand, unleashing a burst of radiant force that sent him flying. David moved beside her, firing precise shots that dropped attackers before they could reach her. They advanced together. Sorelia, a storm of shimmering power. David, a relentless shield of steel and fire. But the enemy was endless. A towering figure emerged from the smoke, an armored commander with a mask of obsidian glass. His voice boomed through a voice modulator. Princess Sorelia, you should have stayed hidden. Sorelia's eyes narrowed. You orchestrated this war. We accelerated what was inevitable, the commander replied. Your worlds were never meant to unite. David stepped in front of her. Funny, we seem to be doing just fine. The commander raised a massive plasma halberd. You are the problem, human. You and your influence. Sorelia's markings flared. Touch him, and I will end you. The commander lunged. David met him head-on, blocking the first strike with his rifle. The impact sent him skidding backward. Sorelia hurled a blast of energy, but the commander's armor absorbed it, glowing red with heat. He swung again, aiming for David's throat. Sorelia intercepted the blow with a shield of shimmering light. The halberd cracked against it, sending shockwaves through the courtyard. David rolled to his feet and fired at the commander's exposed joints. Sparks flew, but the armor held. "He's shielded!" David shouted. "Then we break the shield," Sorelia replied. She closed her eyes, drawing power from deep within her, deeper than she had ever dared. Her markings blazed white-hot, illuminating the battlefield. The commander charged. Sorelia unleashed everything. A column of radiant energy erupted from her palms, slamming into the commander's chest. His armor cracked, then shattered. David seized the opening, driving forward with a roar and tackling the commander to the ground. They hit the stone hard. David ripped the mask free. The commander's eyes widened in shock. Sorelia stepped forward, energy still crackling around her. "This ends now." The commander spat blood. "You cannot stop the war." Sorelia knelt beside him, her voice steady. "Watch me." She pressed her glowing hand to the ground. A shockwave rippled outward. Pure, blinding light that swept across the courtyard, across the citadel, across the entire capital. It washed over soldiers, mercenaries, extremists, and guards alike. Weapons fell from stunned hands. Fighting ceased. Silence spread like dawn. Sorelia rose slowly, her power dimming. David stared at her, breathless. "What did you just do?" "I showed them the truth," she said softly. "That unity is stronger than fear." He stepped closer, his voice low. "You saved them." She met his gaze. "We saved them." For a moment, the world around them faded. The smoke, the ruins, the stunned soldiers. All that remained was the gravity between them, stronger than any force in the galaxy. David reached out his hand. Sorelia took it. The connection was electric, inevitable, undeniable. "You know," he murmured, "you never did let me make the first move." Sorelia smiled, her markings glowing with warmth. "Then make it now." David leaned in. Their lips met in the center of a battlefield, surrounded by the remnants of a war they had stopped together. It was not a kiss of victory, but of beginning, of something fierce and fragile and entirely theirs. When they finally pulled apart, the sky above them cleared. The fires dimmed. The first rays of dawn broke across the horizon. Sorelia squeezed his hand. "What happens now?" David looked out over the awakening city. "Now, we rebuild." "And us?" she asked softly. He turned to her, eyes steady. "We rise." Sorelia smiled. "Together." And as the sun climbed over the ruins of war, Princess Sorelia Vespera and Lieutenant David Bishop stood side by side, partners, warriors, lovers, ready to forge a future their worlds had never dared to imagine. Epilogue. Little stars of war and peace. The gardens of the rebuilt Concordance Citadel shimmered beneath the twin suns, their crystalline leaves catching the light like scattered jewels. Peace had held for 5 years now, fragile at first, then steady, then something stronger, something real. Sorelia sat beneath the flowering starbloom tree, its petals glowing faintly blue to match her skin. She watched the chaos unfolding across the lawn with a smile she couldn't suppress. A squadron of small, blue-skinned children, her children, charged across the grass with wooden practice rifles and makeshift armor fashioned from old supply crates. Their bioluminescent markings flickered with excitement as they shouted battle cries in a mix of Thalren and human slang. "Flank left! No, ambush formation! Dad says never run in a straight line. Mom says aim for the knees." Sorelia laughed softly. "They certainly inherited our subtlety." David dropped down beside her, still in his training gear, sweat glistening along his jaw. "Subtlety is overrated." One of the children, Carl the eldest, spotted him and pointed dramatically. "Target acquired, get him." David raised his hands in mock surrender. "Traitors! All of you!" The children swarmed him, tackling him to the ground in a tangle of limbs, giggles, and glowing blue markings. David let out a theatrical groan as they piled on. Sorelia watched, warmth blooming in her chest. There had been a time when she feared this future was impossible, when war and politics and ancient grudges threatened to tear their worlds apart. But somehow, through fire and chaos and impossible odds, they had carved out a life together, a life filled with peace, a life filled with love, a life filled with little blue children who played soldier with far too much enthusiasm. David finally managed to sit up, 3 children clinging to him like determined barnacles. "Sorelia," he called, "a little help?" She rose gracefully, her gown shimmering. "I believe you told me once that you could handle anything." "That was before they learned tactics," he said, struggling as Carl attempted to pin his arm. Sorelia approached, kneeling beside the wriggling pile. "Children," she said in her best royal tone, "release your father." They froze. Then Carl grinned. "Only if we get dessert tonight." Sorelia raised a brow. "You negotiate like a diplomat." "Dad says that's a compliment." David groaned. "I said no such thing." Sorelia leaned in and kissed him softly, ignoring the chorus of "ew" from the children. When she pulled back, she whispered, "We built something beautiful." David looked at their children, laughing, glowing, alive, and nodded. "Yeah, we did." Sorelia took his hand, her markings glowing with quiet joy. "And they will grow up in a world where humans and Thalren stand together." David squeezed her fingers. "Because we did." The children resumed their game, now pretending to defend the citadel from imaginary invaders. Their laughter echoed through the gardens, bright and fearless. Sorelia rested her head on David's shoulder. Peace had not come easily. Love had not come quietly. But both had come, and they had endured. And in the heart of the citadel, surrounded by little blue children playing soldier, Sorelia Vespera and David Bishop watched their future unfold with hope brighter than any star. The end. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.